now for my political panel, and this afternoon it's Liberal MP Katie Allen and Labor Senator Jenny McAllister. Welcome to both of you.
Hi, TK. Hi.
Jenny, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has warned that unvaccinated people may not regain freedoms even once the state reaches 80% of the eligible population fully vaccinated. Do you support that as a sort of strategy to deal with COVID?
I think we need to see some more details from the top down. The Prime Minister has talked about this, the Premiers are talking about it. It seems the way that we are heading. I'd like to know more about it, but I think it's likely that we will see that there are some things that being vaccinated allows you to do, at least in the short term.
OK. What more detail would we need that you think is not there? I mean, it's pretty clear, isn't it? You can't go to restaurants, you can't go to the theatre, you can't, do certain things. If you don't want the vaccine, stay home.
Yeah, isn't the question which things, Patricia? And, we don't know the answer to that yet. These decisions are in the hands of state premiers. But I think it's clear that we are going down that path. And the real issue is this. There are a lot of people who have found it very difficult to get vaccinated. And it does seem a bit unreasonable to put these constraints on people until people have had the opportunity to obtain the vaccine.
Katie Allen, that's an interesting point. You can't kind of set that if you haven't made it very easy to get people vaccinated, right? I just want you to address that point, but then also outline to me the things that you think you should be stopped from doing if you're not vaccinated, and then the other things that should be non-negotiable that you can't lock people out of.
Right. Thanks for that complicated question, PK.
I'm here to help.
You are. So firstly, what I would say is we are aiming as a national plan, national targets to get 70 to 80%. So there's always going to be 20% of people, even if we reach the 80%, who can't or won't get vaccinated. The most important message is we want as many people to put their arms forward and get that jab. Do it for themselves, do it for their family, do it for the country. But there will be people who refuse for whatever reason. And as a medical practitioner, I'm used to having to deal with that. So I've been thinking about this for a long time. And we've always said as a government we won't make vaccines mandatory except in certain circumstances for the safety of the people that you're caring for. But at the general population level, our government's always been very clear that this will be safe, voluntary and free. And so I think it's very important that we have an alternative choice for those who cannot or refuse to get vaccinated. I'd prefer everyone to get vaccinated, but I'm not naive about the fact that we cannot get 100% vaccination in any standard whatsoever. Now, if you look overseas, what's happening is people are saying you either have to show a certification that you've been vaccinated or you have a recent certification that you've had a COVID test. So that's, to me, giving people choice, or as you said, they can stay home. So there's going to have to be choice in this because, of course, there are some things that people need to be able to do to survive. You can't lock them up in their homes, as might be happening at the moment. We need to get out and get this economy back going again, and we need to do it as safely as possible for the individuals themselves, but also for the general public. And it's that balance between individual freedoms and the safety of the public.
Okay.
Now, your second part of your question...
Yeah. Go.
Will I go on to that?
Yeah.
Second part of your question was about what is it that people should or shouldn't be able to do. So from the very get-go, I was very clear that I thought that we should have mandatory vaccinations when you're putting other people's lives at serious risk. So we've always had mandatory vaccinations for flus in some state, for the flu vaccine, in aged care. And that's because those people who are older, that expect to be protected from people bringing the flu into an aged care facility. So I've been very clear from the get-go, from January this year, that I don't think it's unreasonable if you've had a flu vaccine that's mandatory, why not have a COVID vaccine that's mandatory? I also think if you're in a high-risk environment, such as a quarantine environment, quarantine hotels, you're choosing to have a job that is going to put people at risk if you bring COVID into that environment. So I think that's another high-risk environment where people may be bringing COVID in from a hotspot, and we want to protect the country from that, that incursion of COVID. And then there's a third area, which I'm very keen to, have a discussion with, which is this issue about in schools or in areas of disability support. And that's because kids can't get vaccinated at the moment under the age of 12. There's no vaccination that's licensed for COVID anywhere in the world. So we want to have a think about whether that might be something. Either you actually move teachers off the front line if they can't get vaccinated, or they have a choice to have a daily COVID test to keep the kids safe.
So, Jenny McAllister, interesting ideas put forward there. Let's talk about the schools one. Do you think, I mean, it's already happening in New South Wales, nothing's been announced for Victoria. Do you think it's reasonable to require teachers, for instance, to get a mandatory vaccination or take them off the front line?
Or a test?
In this particular point in the pandemic, it seems as though we are some way off having even teenagers vaccinated, let alone young children. The epidemiologists are telling us that that presents a real risk for spread. And so it seems to me that that is an important place to be ensuring that people have the vaccine. I like the way Katie talks about the options that you need to provide. And I think the lesson that you can learn from some of the other workplaces where they've sought to mandate vaccines is that it's best done if you work in cooperation with staff and with the unions. I think there's been insufficient attention paid to that in the aged care sector, in the disability sector, and we're paying the price. We are months past the vaccine deadline in the aged care sector, and we are still seeing infections in aged care facilities.
Jenny, I just want to stay with you, turning to some of the movements in your party. Are you comfortable that Christina Keneally was dropped into Fowler, pushing out that local candidate, that Vietnamese Australian lawyer who'd worked so hard, you know, as you have to do before running for pre-selection?
It's really important that we start paying attention to diversity in our party and actually in the parliament. And there's a lot of really young and energetic people who are really impatient and ambitious for movement on this. And I think we have to listen to their voices and respond to them. I'm not really in a position to comment particularly on what's happening in Fowler. I don't get a say in that process. But I'll make this more general observation. What we learnt from Affirmative Action for Women in the Labor Party is that your results aren't judged on a single seat. They're judged by your progress across pre-selection rounds and, frankly, across time. We ought to be setting ourselves some bold goals in terms of shifting the dial on this. We have an opportunity in this pre-selection round and in future ones to make a real difference. And we know that the party will be stronger if we can have a caucus that represents the community as closely as possible.
All right, what do you mean by bold goals? That sounds to me like, do you think there should be diversity targets?
I think that we need to have a really strong conversation about how we make our caucus truly representative. We have opportunities in this pre-selection round, even in New South Wales, to do so. We certainly do across other seats across the country. Why not start that conversation? And I actually expect at the state conference in New South Wales, we will be having that conversation in October.
Okay, so just to nail this down, you think there should be diversity targets for winnable seats?
I think the form in which we set our goals and pursue them is a conversation we're yet to have. But I do think that there are clear calls from many people in the community, young activists in our party, for us to do better on this. I'll make the point that that's true for the entire parliament. It's not exclusive to Labor, and it's actually true for Australian businesses as well. We have to respond to that, and it's a conversation we need to have within our organisation.
Okay, so again, nailing you down, do you support targets for this?
I think we're yet to have the conversation about the specific mechanism.
You and I have had the conversation for like 3 minutes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we need to be bold about the goals. I think the form of a target for ethnic and cultural diversity is different to the form for women for a couple of obvious reasons. Mostly that defining people who'd be eligible to be supported under that regime could actually prove to be a little more challenging than it is for a gender target. Let's have that conversation within the organisation, but we do need to be bold and to support the young people who are calling for change.
Katie, I'm going to ask you on something else, although I think ethnic diversity in your party is an issue too, but I'm going to park it because I want to ask this question. Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce says certain ideas have evolved when it comes to the Nationals making a deal with the Liberals surrounding potentially committing to net zero emissions by 2050 ahead of the upcoming Glasgow Climate Summit. Do you agree? Is this an instance of evolution?
Absolutely. And I'm in there pushing. I'm a strong voice for climate action and for a 2050 target, and I'd like to see that delivered by our party. We need to, as I've always said on your show, Patricia, we always need to have a plan that goes with the target. I need to see more on the plan, but I also want to see the target. You can't have one without the other.
Okay, so you want a locked-in target, none of this kind of working towards.
100%.
And on ethnic diversity, your party's got to lift a bit there too, right?
Yeah, look, I think there's a different fundamental process of pre-selection with Labor versus Liberal, and I've been a recipient of Labor airdropping in from the Faceless Men new candidates that are not locally based. In Higgins, there was a candidate who was a political activist from the north, and we, as a party, really do hold dear the ability for a community to send its local candidate to Canberra. Now, local meaning, within the region. Sometimes it can be a little bit across the boundaries, but the local candidate issue is a very strong aspect because we're very much a grassroots party in that regard, because that's what, your right as a Liberal Party member is to select your representative. When you go to Canberra from your community, you're not a delegate, you're a representative. And so that's the thing, is that the communities themselves choosing their own delegate, choosing their own representative for the House of Representatives, that's the way to get there. And I think what we're seeing now is the strong community voice about that representation. That's what people want to see. And of course, Australia is changing. It is changing, and we need to have that reflected. Absolutely. We need more cultural diversity, multicultural diversity, and of course, we need that gender diversity as well.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we're out of time. Thanks for joining me.